carbon neutrality is exactly the same as net zero emissions. So we have, hopefully we will abate emissions, and then we'll offset any remaining emissions to end up with a carbon neutral situation. I'd like to say a little bit of, or give a little bit of background on climate science to sort of put this talk into context. What we can see here on the screen are three plots of fossil fuel emissions, atmospheric CO2 concentrations, and global average temperature. So on the left, we can see the global fossil CO2 emissions going back over the last century or so, and we can see that there has been a rather dramatic increase in fossil CO2 emissions. What is remarkable, I think, is that even in world wars or global recessions, or here in the pandemic, maybe there's a little dip in the emissions, but the upward trajectory continues. And as a result of those emissions, there has been a significant increase in the level of atmospheric CO2. The pre-industrial level was approximately 275 or so parts per million. We're currently at about 415 parts per million and increasing at about 2 or 3 per year. It's really hard to predict the future, obviously, and that goes also with climate. So, there's significant uncertainties on what the emissions will be, and there are significant uncertainties on the climate sensitivity to future emissions. But I think we can be reasonably confident that, absent significant changes, we will be probably going down one of these two lines here, which I've drawn in either a low climate change, maybe lower emissions and lower climate sensitivity, or a high climate change sort of pathway. And you can see that these pathways will take us above 1.5 or even 2 degrees global average warming in the next few decades. And obviously, I think a lot of people in the audience today will know why I chose the 1.5 and 2, and that's because they are enshrined in the Paris Agreement. So in terms of our aspiration on the right, we announced this about a year ago, that we aspire to be carbon neutral globally by 2050. On the left here, we can see an image. These are our emissions as assessed using protocols developed by the Carbon Disclosure Project, CDP. And you can see that the lion's share of our emissions, Ford Motor Company's emissions, are associated with the use of the vehicles that we sell. That accounts for approximately 75%. Suppliers, so these are emissions from suppliers, are approximately 17%. We have a miscellaneous category, and our facilities contribute about 3%. So we have developed a plan. Our focus is on this 95% of our emissions, which we have sort of somewhat more direct control over: vehicle use, suppliers, factories, and facilities. So we have gone on record with an aspiration to be carbon neutral by 2050, and we have also developed interim CO2 reduction targets with targets in the year 2035. Achieving net zero carbon emissions is indicated roughly by the green arrow on the slide. So you can see that it's a dramatic departure from the trend over the last century or so, and of course that is a daunting task to reduce emissions from global society in the coming decades to achieve carbon neutrality. Looking at history and precedents for optimism, I'd like to point out a couple of things. So carbon neutrality, achieving carbon neutrality is going to be hard. It's going to be very hard, but we've done hard things in the past. So for example, we've had tremendous progress in terms of reducing air pollutant emissions and improving the air quality here in the US and also in other places, for example, Europe. And on the left, we see a plot from EPA, and this gives us the gross domestic product, for example, at the top has increased by a factor of 3 or so since 1970. And then vehicle miles travelled are way up, other things are way up, but the aggregate emissions of air pollutants are down substantially. So this is remarkable progress, and over the past several decades, the link between economic progress and air pollutant emissions, certainly criteria pollutant emissions, has been broken. Looking at other regions, we've got the 2 plots here from the US and also from the EU in the middle of the screen. And on the left, we've given data for developing nations such as India and China. So they have somewhat lower contributions of their transport sectors, but they are growing. So the bottom line here is that the transportation sector it makes an important contribution to fossil CO2 emissions, and as illustrated in the figure on the right, it is growing. So it obviously needs to be addressed. Achieving carbon neutrality is a really daunting challenge. It should not be underestimated, but there is significant reason for optimism going forward in terms of achieving carbon neutrality. We are seeing advances in electrification. We will see advances in automation and connectivity, and these are likely to transform the mobility landscape in the next few decades, bringing, I think, tremendous opportunities and, of course, some challenges.